and welcome to another episode of the Rise Above Cancer podcast. Today, I'm very excited as I have another guest on the podcast, Sarah from Maggie's. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, Aimee. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on today. So, just to start then, because I've never met you before, can you tell me a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, I can. So I'm Sarah Beard. I'm Business Development Director at Maggie's. I've been working at Maggie's for 16 years now,
Wow.
and that feels like a really long time. And every now and again, I think maybe I should change my job. And then I realize how much I love the job, the organization, what we do, and how we do it. And I don't think, I think I've got the best job in the world, and I don't think there's another one that would keep me as entertained and keep me as rejuvenated as this role does. It's an absolute blessing to meet the people we meet, to see the help and support the centres give, and the work we do with nurses and doctors along the way. It's just got a bit of everything, so I love it.
Oh, that's amazing. I didn't realize as well that you'd been 16 years. That's a really long time. That's amazing.
So long, so long. But the organization has changed so much in that time. It doesn't feel like this, I've been doing the same job all that time.
So when you're not working then, so kind of like on a more personal
Yeah.
level, I guess, what do you like doing when you're not working?
So I've got two lovely children,
Okay.
teenagers.
How old are they?
They're 15 and nearly 13.
Well,
So that keeps me entertained. I love yoga. I'm a gymnast as a child, and then I've always loved, dancing and moving. So I do a lot of yoga, and I do hot yoga, which is my favorite thing to do. And I ride my bike. So many years ago, I got involved in cycling because of an amazing charity called To Wish Upon a Star. And I know the founder personally, and so she started getting people on our bikes. And so for the first time in I don't know how long, I got myself on a bike and was wobbly to start, and then realized how much I enjoyed it, because unlike running, which I've sort of never done,
hmm
go quite far on a bike and you can eat cake and drink coffee along the way, and that's
Yeah, have a little stop.
so much better than running and not be able to eat cake and coffee along the way.
Oh, that's amazing. So you're very active, very fit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, it's weird to put myself in that category, but I love to move, I think, and
yeah,
I'm really encouraging of my friends and family to keep moving, and the benefits that happens.
100%, definitely. Oh, lovely. Where are you from?
So I'm from Llantrisant.
Okay, because I thought when you were talking, I was like, you're definitely from Wales.
I am, yeah. My mum's a Londoner. My dad's from the Rhondda. So we lived in Llantrisant as a family and as children. I went to university in Newcastle, and then I did the NHS graduate training scheme down in Swansea.
Okay.
So spent 10 years working in Singleton and Morriston hospitals as they were then, and then took the job in Maggie's and moved to Cardiff. So I'm in Penarth.
Ah, so you're not too far from me then.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Ah. So, okay. So we'll go into a bit about your role in a second. But I thought it would be really interesting for the listeners because I talk about Maggie's quite a lot on the podcast, online and stuff as well. So I was just wondering, would you be able to kind of just share the kind of history of Maggie's and how and why it was started?
Yeah, of course. I'd love to share that because it is one of my favourite stories. So many years ago now, probably over 30 years ago now, Maggie herself, Maggie Keswick-Jenks, got diagnosed with a breast cancer, initially when she was in her early 40s. And she was a very educated woman, clever woman, lots of family and friends around her. But when she got her diagnosis, she was really struck by how alone she felt, and how sort of confused she was when she went to the hospital and couldn't keep up with some of the words that we used, the descriptions, the, remembering everything that was said. And Maggie was a landscape architect, and she was married to a chap called Charles Jenks. He was an architectural critic. So between them, they really understood how a physical space can make you feel. And she thought it was so ironic that you could go to hospital to be made well, and yet the experience of going to hospital almost had the opposite effect. It kind of drained you. You can't park your car, you can't often find your way to where you're going. If you're an inpatient, you often can't see out of the window because they're not placed in the right place. You can't have a cup of tea when you want a cup of tea. You can only have one when the trolley comes around. And so she wrote basically her experience down, and documented all of these nuances, how she felt when she was opposite a nurse or doctor in a white coat, in a uniform, how that made her feel like she didn't know enough, couldn't remember enough, that sort of power balance between those that have the information and can understand it versus her as a patient who didn't have the information, didn't understand it. And coupled with being in a place of physical space that didn't lift her, didn't empower her, didn't motivate her to feel well. She does recall being in her inpatient bed, not being able to see out of the window. She remembers the toilet where the door doesn't touch the floor or the ceiling, and how exposing that is. She remembered having a cup of tea in a plastic cup that was really squidgy and you couldn't quite hold on to it because it was hot. So all of these little things sort of added to her experience and didn't make it brilliant.
Yeah.
She just thought one day, there must be a way to do this differently. How can we create a kind of caring environment which, does the opposite of that, makes you feel motivated, safe, welcome, not lost when you walk into it, and how you can fill a space like that with knowledgeable staff who are easily accessible and know your story. So again, she recalled being in as a patient experience, you're meeting millions of people along the way, you're repeating your story over and over. It takes a good while for you to get to the point where you meet somebody who knows all the answers. The NHS system means, you meet your receptionist, you meet the junior nurse, you meet the more senior nurse, you eventually get to the doctor. It's so by the very nature of the system, you don't get to the person that's got all the details for quite some time. And then sometimes those people, because they're so busy and looking after so many people, you can't always get back to them when, you've got those ideas or those questions that you feel are unanswered. So she thought to herself, how can we care differently? How could we get the people with the knowledge more accessible to people? How do we create that feeling of time? And how do you create the feeling of lovely space so that people have, a different feeling within them? Like, I've got time here. I can see that people aren't that rushed around me. I feel safe. I can start talking about the things that, are important to me, and maybe that I can't talk about when I'm with my nurse or doctor, when I'm sensing that everything around me is so busy, time is precious, I must ask just one or two questions, there's no time for a lot more. And so she started to play around ideas with her nurse, Laura Lee, who
So
was
I was going to say, was this or while she was as she was going through her treatment and stuff, this is all the stuff that she was thinking of, like,
yeah,
at the
so it
time?
was sort of two phases. So she was initially diagnosed, got treated, was well for a period of time, and then the diagnosis returned.
Okay.
And so it was on that sort of second time. She talked a lot to her nurse, Laura Lee, to her doctor, Professor Robert Leonard, and they sort of became friends as they thought and they were quite like-minded individuals. They all saw that it was, she was onto something, and it was slightly ironic how the system doesn't help patients actually. And since that time and over that time, we've talked a lot within the health service about truly patient-centered care, but it's quite hard to achieve. And I think Maggie, with Laura and Bob Leonard, just started to refine all of these tiny little things that Maggie,
Picked up on,
articulated and documented, and then between them, created this new kind of care. And they started to plan the first Maggie Centre in Edinburgh.
So how did that start then? How did it kind of, obviously Maggie had this idea, and how did that kind of flourish then into kind of getting the ball rolling into what it is today?
So Maggie and Laura went off to America to have a look at what other people were doing. And they came across a couple of organizations. One particularly at the time was called the Wellness Community, and that kind of brought people together like Maggie's does, but not in specifically designed spaces. They were just using office blocks or different types of accommodation. And so that introduced Laura and Maggie to the idea of how you can do things in groups rather than individually, how you can abandon time, having no clocks, having a drop-in facility where you don't need an appointment, you can just go in when you're ready. Yeah. And then because, of her kind of commitment and, understanding of the power that inspiring space has, she started to talk to her architectural friends, and say, what do you think? And they started kind of doodling what you could do in order to make what is essentially a home. It's just based and designed like a home. There's a kitchen that's in the heart of every centre. And, if you think about where you spend time when you go to your friends' houses, where parties often are.
Definitely in the kitchen.
We all love a kitchen disco, don't we?
Yeah.
And so I think, Maggie's was just like, let's, some of the things like we reflect on that makes Maggie's amazing is really very simple, and so it's creating a simple space that's accessible, that feels welcoming. One of our favorite sayings is that somebody once said, going into Maggie's is like going into the home of your best friend's mum.
I completely get that.
You might not go there very often, but you're like totally welcome, aren't you?
Oh, yeah, 100%. Like every time I go in, everyone's really polite. Somebody comes to greet you, very relaxed, very chilled. And one of the first things they ask is if you would like a cuppa, which is lovely.
Yeah. And in the kitchen, it's subtle, but like the mugs are out, the tea and coffee's out. So we're saying, the first time you might visit a Maggie Centre, exactly as you say, people say, do you want a cuppa? But as soon as the kettle starts boiling, conversations start to happen, because it's a relaxed atmosphere. It doesn't feel as intense as being opposite a desk to
in a doctor's office. Yeah, exactly.
And so that's all that's different, is that physical space that's relaxing people and making people feel empowered enough to talk. And then when you visit a Maggie Centre for a second, third, fourth time, you can help yourself. We make it as easy for people. You can see where the cups of tea, you can see where the cups are, you can see where the tea and coffee is. You're encouraged, you're empowered, you're enabled to put that cup of tea together, because you're just, going back to what Maggie noticed about, the power balance between medics, nurses, people who know, and patients and carers who sort of supposedly don't. We want to rebalance that in Maggie's. You want to be able to say, you do know, we can help we can build your confidence, to grow this level of understanding and capacity to keep all this information in your head. You are in control. We want you to help feel in control in a space and a time and a moment where it can feel out of control.
Yeah, and probably one of the most difficult times of someone's life as well, isn't it?
Absolutely, Aimee.
Yeah. Um, so talking about patients and family members and caregivers, um, so in terms of what Maggie's offers, obviously we've talked a little bit about the space itself, which we'll go into a little bit more detail in a second. But can you explain what Maggie's offers to everyone?
Yeah. So nice word, everyone, because we do support everyone. So everyone and anyone affected by any kind of cancer at any point during their experience is welcome to Mackie's, and you don't need an appointment. You can just walk in. So we want to be as accessible to everyone and anyone who needs us at the point in time when they feel they need us. So we encourage people just to come in, get the cup of tea like you've described, and start talking. We at Maggie's don't hold any notes or information on the people that come in. So that again is making sure that the person who's coming in to see us is in control. We get our information from them. We help them unpick what they know or don't know, how they can find out more information. Basically, we help people find allies. You know, who's around to help you in the system? How can we help you navigate it? And that is about all the time empowering people and to make them feel confident to ask more questions and to find out more information. And then if fundamentally we're a well-being service, you know, we're a mental health well-being service. How can we help you feel psychologically, emotionally, as well as possible during the chaos of a cancer diagnosis or a cancer experience? And not just you who may have cancer, but your family members. Because lots of people will say to us, you know, my wife or my husband or my child or my parent has cancer, and you know, and that's, you know, I'm well, but yet I feel terrible. You know, watching my partner, whoever it is, being unwell is such a painful experience. But I don't want to burden anybody with this. You know, I'm trying to be supportive of the person in my family that I love that's got cancer. And so that, you know, we are absolutely there for friends, families, and carers, and we appreciate the burden that puts on people, and we want to help people who are caring for somebody with cancer be as strong and resilient and have the capacity to cope with the situation that may be going on at home or within their social circle as best as possible. And so every centre offers all sorts of different workshops and courses and groups or individual conversations so that people can build this sort of psychological resilience to their situation. So we're about learning new skills. How do you manage if you're feeling particularly stressed? How do you manage if you can't sleep? You know, nutritional conversations and workshops. How do I manage if, you know, I can't eat what I used to eat? I can't taste like I used to when I was eating, and eating has become difficult for me either physically or psychologically. You know, how can I meet people who are in the same boat as me? And again, what's, you know, the power of Maggie's is that the people that will sit round a Maggie's kitchen table and chat with one another are the same people that would sit silently in a waiting area in the hospital or doctor's surgery. And again, the only thing that's different there is the space. It's,
Yeah,
you know, amazing to
definitely.
see.
Yeah, I think from my experience, like as I mentioned to you earlier, like I went to the young persons group for a while, and even though we all had different kind of cancer diagnosis, it was just good to speak to people, especially kind of like around my age or a bit younger. Um, because when you get diagnosed at 31, like no one your age, or, you know, that you could speak to about stuff like that. Yeah, and that's one thing that I noticed. And when I've been to the centre, just, dropped in, popped in, I've started talking to people that, like as you said, like you probably wouldn't strike a conversation with them when you're in the waiting room of a hospital.
No.
And Maggie just gives you that confidence and that and they allow you to
Yeah.
like have those conversations without worrying about anything.
Absolutely. And from what you're describing just there, it's a club none of us want to be in, isn't it? So once you get a diagnosis, it's like, oh my goodness, what do I do with this? And Maggie said exactly what you're saying. I'm a young woman. Who do I chat this through with? Who, because my friends and family will say, oh gosh, yes, that's terrible, but they don't really know.
I understand. And like that's what you said she felt lonely. Like you've got loads of people around you, but that doesn't take away from the fact that you feel lonely because they can't understand or articulate how you're feeling. Um,
Absolutely. And how, you know, people come to Maggie's because they're in this same boat. So you don't have to have that conversation. There it is. As you're describing, you're talking to people who are the same age or similar ages in your young persons group, but just in the sort of milieu of the centre, you're talking to people who are a lot older, a lot younger, different genders, different, whatevers. And so that's again, it's just the space that is enabling people, giving people the freedom to say, I don't feel stupid to chat to people here. I feel absolutely safe that everybody's in the same boat as me. Quite a lot of people here are going to absolutely understand what I'm going through because they're going through it themselves. Um, and as you're describing, Maggie was surrounded by friends and family, but the loneliness, how she described and talked about that loneliness, it's really real for people. And you've got to connect with people who do understand.
Definitely. And I think sometimes as well, you obviously want to talk about things, but you can be very mindful about when you want to have those conversations with the closest people. Like you obviously don't want them to get upset. So I think for me, Maggie's was that place where I could go and I could say exactly how I felt without worrying um about what I was saying. I knew I wasn't being judged, and I was just being listened to. And I think that's the main bit that really helped me, I think, process everything.
I couldn't agree more. And I honestly think fundamentally, that's why I've worked in the organization for so long, because giving people like you that space, that opportunity to talk is an absolute blessing. When we're obviously everybody who works in Maggie's is a really big supporter of the NHS and all that cancer services is trying to do. Many of us have spent, long periods of our career working within the health service. But there is something missing, there isn't often the time, the capacity, the space to enable people to really talk about what's bothering them and to connect people with others who are in the same situation. And that's a real gift to give people when they're in, as I say, the chaos that a cancer diagnosis can bring.
Definitely. And with obviously the team of people that were in the centres then, so how did kind of selecting what type of people needed to be in the centres, like how was that kind of worked out?
Okay, so every centre has the same sort of structure of team, and that's got a centre head in the middle of all of that. So the centre head is often a clinical psychologist or a very experienced cancer nurse. And then there are what we call cancer support specialists. So they are, again, cancer nurses or therapeutic radiographers by background. We have benefits advisors, and a fundraiser, of course, because we're a fundraising organisation. And then we have sessional staff that will support the programme. So yoga, tai chi, nutritional experts, people that will come in and do, complementary things within the programme. But when we're setting up a centre and we're working with the hospitals, because Maggie's are located on hospital grounds next to major cancer centres, and at the moment we've got 24 around the UK. But we will say to the hospital teams, be prepared. We're probably going to pinch your best cancer nurse to work at Maggie's. And again, what's amazing about the work that we do and the people that work within our centres is that they are experienced cancer professionals. They've worked in the cancer system for a long time. They appreciate what's brilliant about it, but they also appreciate what's missing. And so we often get people, really experienced nurses and professionals that will come to us and say, when you open the centre, I want that job, So the recruitment is actually a joy, and is sometimes easier than we appreciate it to be, because we are a magnet for those very special individuals who have got amazing capacity to have difficult conversations, are expert communicators, and as I say, have spent quite a long time of their career knowing what's missing for patients and family members. And so when we Maggies come along to work alongside the NHS Cancer Centre, quite a lot of people are sort of hands up, pick me, please, can I come work for you?
That's a testament to you guys though, isn't it? And the charity and everything that it's achieved to have people that are like, yep, there's Maggie's is coming to the hospital where I work. I 100% want to work there,
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's well, when we get our centre staff together, and when we see what each of the individual centres are achieving for their local population, they're an outstanding group of individuals, and that's not special to us. The NHS is full of outstanding individuals, but we get those very special ones who, because it's not an easy job. We want to make people who use a Maggie Centre feel joy, even in the distress of the situation they're in, but creating that level of joy when there's difficult conversations to have, there's in lots of emotions going on day after day. So it's not to belittle the work that's done. It's very complex psychological work that's done in the centre, but somehow between physical space we create and the amazingly skilled staff that we recruit, we create these little pots of havens, spaces where people can feel chilled and can really change their lives, change the way they behave, change the way they perceive their fear and their anxiety of a situation. So that, obviously I think they're very, very special places.
Yeah, no, 100% they are. Which is why I talk about Maggie's all the time. And I try to find ways as much as I can, try and help, because it's the way that I feel that I can give back, I guess, even though I don't feel like I could ever repay what they've given me. But
oh gosh, you can by doing this, promoting through your podcast. Thank you very much.
So Sarah, we've talked a little bit about your role. Would it be okay to go in a bit more detail about your role, what you do, and maybe talk a bit more about kind of like the new centres and stuff and the process of how they come about? And
yeah, of course. So we've got 24 centres open at the moment. We're building our 25th in Northampton just as we speak. And then we've got a Building Hope campaign that's set up to raise £30 million for the next 5 centres.
Wow, that's a lot of money for a centre, isn't it?
For a centre. So we build centres that are designed by very creative architects. We want to create spaces, as we've talked about, that make people feel good, feel valued, feel safe and able to communicate, really difficult things. And we want to create spaces that will last 50, 60, 100 years. We want to say to the NHS and other people, this is how you can design care. This is how You can design physical spaces to make people feel good and feel well. So that inevitably kind of comes at a cost. But Edinburgh, which is our first centre, we've extended that 3 times actually over the
Wow.
past 25 years. And if you went into it, today it looks as new as it did in its first year. So there's something about investing in the quality of the materials you use, the furniture you have, the way you design your spaces to be flexible but suit your needs. In that, that kind of thinking does cost, and particularly in today's world when constructing anything is quite expensive. But they are built to last. They are built to be beacons of hope for the community, for the NHS, and to sort of describe and show, what care can look like. So that, that means it's quite easy to have conversations with major cancer centres around the UK to say, do you want to work with us? I remember years ago, it was a much more difficult ask when everyone was like, we don't know who you are, we don't know what you're trying to do. So those conversations were much more difficult back when I started. But now, again, through good people like yourselves and others who are talking about us, and our NHS colleagues who really value what we bring to the patient pathway. So sometimes, or now, we can go to hospitals and say, we're Maggie's, do you want to work with us? And people say, yes, please, we know who you are. We've heard about you.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so that's that makes that bit of the job a bit easier. The challenging bit is finding a space on, really busy hospital sites where there's often not an inch of spare land. So how do we work with our NHS colleagues to find a space for us to build? We ask our NHS colleagues if we can have that piece of land for free, and that's their contribution to us. And then we plan and build and fundraise. So these days we're fundraising at least £5 million for every centre, and then we have to raise the revenue to keep the centres going. But back to your original question, is that we've got 10 more in the pipeline.
That's exciting.
Yeah. So
can you say where they are or not?
Yeah. So Northampton I've mentioned, and then we're planning a purpose-built centre in Cambridge, in Coventry, in Bristol, Kent, North Wales. That's funded by the Steve Morgan Foundation. So that's going to start to be built next month and open next year. And in Liverpool, that's also funded by
amazing.
the foundation. You know that well.
Yeah.
And then
I'll have to go up there when it's built. Pop in.
Yeah, do. And then Guy's in London, and then a few others that are in the pipeline.
That's amazing. I've got a question. So obviously talking about the architecture and stuff, and I know every Maggie's is different, and I absolutely love that. Like, I feel like it's tailored to where it's being put. So how does that process work? So like how do the architects decide kind of like how they want to create the space? Obviously, there's probably a lot of background research and stuff that's got to go into kind of where they are.
Yeah, so loads of thinking goes into that. Every hospital, is different. Some are very urban, some are quite rural, some are very, very busy sites, some are bigger, more, there's more space and opportunity available. So depending on what like the challenges of each hospital site gives us, helps us think about what architect we need to work with. And so we've got a big long list of architects that we'd like to work with, all of which have got different skills and different abilities and have got experience in the kind of sites we need to, or the challenges those sites present us. So we sort of try and pair the architect with the right site. But Laura, our chief exec, will go and interview, a couple of architects and, again, see, do they want to work with us? Do they understand us? Which, of course, almost all of them do. And we are lucky enough that almost all of the architects around the world want to work with us because we have, obviously a nice reputation for, not cutting corners on the things that make our centre so special.
Which is, I suppose, is Maggie's non-negotiable, was it, being an architect herself?
Yeah, well, I think it's, I've learned as an absolute non-architect that if you need a problem solving, ask an architect. I mean, they have the most amazing minds. And they're absolutely fascinating to work with. And we often will walk around a hospital site with an architect and say, where on earth would you put something here? And then they come up with like 4 or 5 different options. We're like, didn't even notice it. Didn't notice you could put anything there, And, in Oxford, for example, we've got like a house on stilts. And so, we walk past this land that had basically sort of fallen away. And the architect's like, oh, we could put the Maggie Centre there. And we're like, all right, could you? Who knew? Who knew? So again, that's why the job is a joy, because you get to work with these amazing people. So the architects, want to work with us and can come up with these really creative and quirky spaces that, produce the kind of space that we want. But they, it's one of those sort of fascinating things that you don't know. As a person with cancer, you sort of don't know what you don't know. And, like Maggie was saying, you're in hospital, it feels a little bit miserable, but you're very grateful that someone is treating you and you're being well looked after. And then you go into one of our spaces and you're like, oh my goodness, I didn't know I was missing this. I didn't know this space was going to have this impact on me. And so we say all of our architects have the same brief, ironically, but exactly as you say, we give each community something very different. So we say to the architects, we need it to be this size, and we need it, this many rooms and this many toilets and a kitchen, the very basic things. But then we say to our architects, we want you to make the unbearableness of cancer more bearable. And really that's the brief. So it's such an amazing brief for them to work with, because it's about emotion, it's about creating a space. And we're always encouraging people to drop in and just see what the spaces are like, because it's something, and you may agree, you literally feel it as soon as you walk through the door. And yet it's quite difficult to describe to people. Go in, because you can just feel it.
Yeah, it's hard unless you've been there yourself and experienced it. It's really difficult to explain.
Exactly. So anybody listening, we're encouraging to go in and have a look at the space.
So with the architects then, so do you kind of give them free rein design wise, and do they take kind of ideas from where the location is and kind of put it into the centre?
Yeah, it's sort of all different things really. And Laura, our chief exec, has done this so many times now. She is, a great critique of, the centres and the concepts that people, the architects will initially come up with. So it's a very relational process. It's a really joint process. We give our building requirements to the architects. They've come up with some initial ideas, and then there's kind of workshops with Laura and other members of our property team. Is this going to work? How is this going to feel? What view will I see when I walk through the door? Once I get to the kitchen, where are my views out? We're not a big fan of corridor spaces, so you want you want the space to feel like it flows. And so we as Maggies have learned to become quite a brilliant client, and so there are really productive conversations that have about what's important to us, what we can't lose. Obviously, we get some, really ambitious architects that might want to do something absolutely super. We, literally can't afford to do these kind of things, but generally, it's a coming together of sort of like-minded people to create these very special spaces that are definitely influenced by the particular site and location where they are, but also, the skills and experience and kind of calling card that the architects may be known for, or the materials they enjoy working with, for example.
Awesome. So with the actual locations themselves then, so how do you guys figure out where Maggie, I know Maggie's is needed everywhere, but how do you figure out where you need to go put the next Maggie's?
Okay, so there are 60 major cancer centres around the UK. So the NHS has 60 major cancer centres, and then there are about 20 what they call satellite radiotherapy centres, so slightly smaller cancer centres that are linked to one of the major ones. And then there are over 100 cancer units. So that would be hospitals that just provide chemotherapy, whereas the cancer centres provide the radiotherapy. So we as an organisation have made a sort of strategic ambition to be at all of the 60 major cancer centres around the UK. There are at least 10 or 11 cancer centres that have other providers doing similar things to what we do. So they're less of a priority for us. So we're concentrating on the 40.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Yeah. So that's basically how we choose them. We are at 2 satellite centres in the Wirral and in Oldham, and in Scotland we are at a couple of cancer units for Farley, Lanarkshire and Fife. But because we've had funding opportunities and we started in Scotland, so we, over time, could be at more than 60 hospitals, but that's our strategic ambition, to try and be accessible to as many people as cancer around the UK. And that's because most people will interact with a cancer centre at some point during their experience.
Yeah. Well, cancer affects 1 in 2 people, doesn't it? So unfortunately, yeah, there is a need for more Maggies.
Absolutely, Aimee. And I think, 16 years ago when I started, and almost 30 years ago when Maggie's started, I don't think there was any idea that the demand would keep rising like it is. And so, we've touched on the fact that we're a fundraising organisation. Basically, we can't go quick enough. We can't raise the funds quick enough to be able to build the amount of centres we would want to build to support the ever increasing numbers of people around the UK who need us.
Do you know, like, I'm not putting you on the spot now with a figure, but do you know how many people visit Maggie's like every year in total?
Yeah, so we had about 330,000 last year. And that was visiting all of our centres. And then each of the centres sort of looks at and records the number of new people that are diagnosed with cancer that come in. So every major cancer centre will have a number of new diagnoses every year, ranges between 3 to 5,000, and much bigger for the bigger centres like the Christie and things. And then we look at what percentage of that number we're seeing. And some of the centres that have been open and operating, the Maggie centres have been open and operating for a long time, are seeing 50-60% of that new cancer diagnosis figure. And that's our ambition. We'll never be for everybody, but how can we be known and accessible to the greatest number of people who are newly diagnosed. So they know that they can use us and start to use us, and they know they can drop in at any point throughout, their experience.
And I think what you just said, the last bit there about, you know, anyone can drop in at any time when, the centre's open. I think a lot of, especially medical stuff, like you have to go at a certain time, or you have to have an appointment, or you have to ring in, and then you have to ring to try and speak to someone, you put on hold, blah, blah, blah. And it just really, I feel like from the way that Maggie has thought about everything, she's tried to just remove all the barriers that were like put up for her and in her experience, and she's just trying to tear them down for everybody else.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself, Aimee. That is, she was a disruptor, and in the what's tricky is that when you're not well, you often haven't got the energy for all of this extra stuff. And that's why, we're grateful for her for a number of reasons, but that's why fundamentally we're so grateful that she had the energy to record, to document, to articulate these things that really frustrated her. And then we've done something good with it. And that, it isn't that difficult in some respects. It is actually, it is difficult to raise the money, to actually build the buildings. They're not that easy to maintain. We have to keep our small group of professional staff psychologically well themselves, keep them motivated. So it's not easy, but it's fundamentally because there are things wrong with the system, and as humans we shouldn't have to put up with that. Like let us demonstrate what care can look like, and get everybody to copy us, and take on our attitude for a whole bunch of things. We'd love to see that. And it is, we've got a couple of centres overseas. We've got
I
four
was
in.
going to ask you about that actually.
Yeah. So we've got centres in Japan, in Tokyo, in Hong Kong, Barcelona, and the Netherlands. And, fundamentally, that's because the global cancer community is quite small, and lots of cancer professionals are interested in what's happening in the UK, as well as America. And so people have spotted what we've done and just said, that would work in my country. That would, that quite a lot of our international colleagues have come, and the projects have come from people like Maggie's, who experienced all of the things she experienced and said, we've got to do better than this. How can we do better for not just me, but for everybody else who goes through this situation? And so in those 4 different countries, we've worked really hard to fundraise. They are financially separate to what we do in the UK, but they worked really hard to raise the funds and to build the centres and to keep them going. But the cultural differences don't matter. You create a good, uplifting space and fill it with, highly skilled professional staff. That's going to work wherever you are around the world.
Yeah.
So
It's so
please go visit one of
interesting.
them, Aimee.
Say that again, sorry.
Go and visit one of those.
Oh, I'd love to. Um, oh, amazing. Okay. So in regards to your role, and I know we've kind of briefly talked about it a little bit. So obviously you've worked for Maggie's for 16 years. So obviously was that back when Maggie's first initially started 16 years ago, or how long is
Well, we're going to be 30. Maggie's is going to celebrate
wow.
30th anniversary in 2026. So
Okay.
maths, we are 28, I think, this year.
Wow.
28 years.
So at the point when you joined then, how many Maggie centres were there then?
I think there were about six or
Okay.
seven.
So it's really like escalated then in the
Yeah,
last
yeah, yeah.
um so back then, why did you want to work for Maggie's?
I think, well, I met Laura, and I was, really impressed with her style and her ability to sort of say yes to everything. She's a disruptor. I would describe her as that. And I, I'd worked in the NHS for 10 years. I absolutely loved my time in the NHS, but I also could see what didn't work. Um, and it is hard to change the system from within sometimes. And I absolutely take my hat off to everybody within the system who's managing to make changes. Um, it is, it's a, particularly in this day and age, it's a difficult
Hmm.
place to work. There isn't enough capacity, there isn't enough workforce, there's not enough staff to do what people need to do. Um, and yet we're so dependent on them. So it is filled with brilliant people trying their very best. But when I met Laura, when I met a couple of the Maggie's staff that were predominantly Scottish based at the time, we started in Scotland and our first 6 centres were in Scotland. And when I saw the caliber of the people that were working in the centres, and I saw firsthand the work that was happening, and you don't have to be in a centre very long before you are noticing that as people walk into a centre, you see them physically relax. There is a weight that's lifted off people's shoulders, and I just thought that that's a blessing. That's a gift to give people, and I really wanted to be part of that. Um, and I think we are a movement. We are, trying to make care in its widest sense as good as it can be. We're trying to teach the world how good quality care can be delivered. And I really love being part of something that is trying to do that in a friendly but slightly disruptive way.
Yeah. A force to be reckoned with, I think Maggie's is.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, what do you love the most about your role? What's your favorite thing about your role?
My favorite thing is all of the brilliant people I interact with. Um, so I'm from Llantrisant. I went to University in Newcastle, University of Northumbria, the Polytechnic. My grandparents actually were medics, um,
Okay.
but I didn't. I wanted to be a physiotherapist when I grew up. I really wanted some sort of caring role, and then got into hospital management, and then got to work with Professor Robert Leonard, and I just thought, what I was so felt so lucky to work with these amazing minds and these amazing people who were really determined to, Robert Leonard came to Swansea to set up our clinical trials unit. They really wanted to push the boundaries. They wanted to make the care and experience for people with cancer much better. And I loved hanging around with those people. I just thought, what, this is amazing. And then I met Laura, met the team at Maggie's, and was just blown away with it. But then we work with the architects who are these amazing minds, and then we work with amazing philanthropic people, and so that's the group of people that have the ability and generosity to give big amounts to Maggie's, as well as people who have used our centres and are so motivated to do their own kind of fundraising. So it doesn't matter what level you're able to give at. You're surrounded by these people who want to give back. They want to give to the community. They want to see other people thrive in the way that they've been able to thrive. And so the best bit of my job is literally hanging around with these brilliant people who share my values and are motivated to make the world a better place. And I'm good at that party, so that's a joy for me every day.
Oh, that's amazing. It's so nice to like speak with you and you know, how you talk with Mike. You can see that it's like completely genuine and yeah, it's lush.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, and look, like how here I am on a podcast with you. I'm like, each day has something so entertaining that it's joyful, and we're as like getting a cancer diagnosis is tough. This is a tough gig for all of us, and yet you're able to make something pretty good with it. And so to do something good and positive for people when they need you because things aren't going that well, who wouldn't want to be part of something like that?
Exactly. Um, so we are coming to the end now of the podcast. But obviously we've touched on fundraising a little bit, and I just wanted to highlight or ask you, why is it so important? Why is fundraising so important for Maggie's?
So fundraising is so important for Maggie's because we don't get any statutory funding from any of, we're on hospital grounds, but we don't get NHS funding generally. And so we need to build our centres, but we need to keep them going. And the centres cost anything from, £300,000 a year to £700,000 a year, depending on how big the teams are. So it's absolutely essential that we can keep our centres going. Everything we do for the people who use us is for free. And so we want and need to be able to raise sufficient funds to keep the 24 centres we've got open, but also the 10 or so that are going to follow, in the next 5 or 6 years, and more in the future. And it's becoming increasingly difficult. So, when the financial kind of climate at the moment is challenging for all of us, and yet, as you've said, the numbers of cancer are going up and up and up, so we're working kind of doubly hard to stand still. And keeping 10 centres open was hard enough. Keeping 24 centres is even more difficult. And then maybe when we get up to 40, 50, that's going to be even more of a challenge. So helping people understand that we are absolutely for free, but we need good people to help us support these centres to keep the door open so we can do more and more of what we do is essential.
Yeah, it's when I first heard how much it costs, to kind of keep a centre open, it is a lot. And I think when you've had a cancer diagnosis as well, the fact that Maggie's is free for everybody, I think it's incredible, because unfortunately, one of the first things you think of when you have a cancer diagnosis is, how am I going to afford to have the time off work? So for Maggie's to be able to offer their services, to anyone and everyone, for free is incredible. So yeah, that's why I always tell people to fundraise Maggie's.
Thank you. We need. I mean, it's awkward, isn't it, talking about money? It's
It is. People
really
don't talk about it, which I can understand, but it is very important, especially for charities.
absolutely, but it's really difficult, as you've described. For people who can't get to work like they used to, how do they pay their bills? That's a real burden. And again, it's a difficult subject, but we want to normalize that. Come in and talk about how difficult these things are. But equally, we need to be able to say it's awkward talking about money, but we need to fundraise to keep these centres open. So the more we can talk about fundraising and the importance of raising funds for us and other charities, the better, as far as we're concerned.
Fab. So before we go, first off, is there anything else that you would like to add, before we come to the end of the episode?
I mean, it's been a joy, Aimee. Thanks for asking me to speak with you today about Maggie's. I would be really encouraging of anyone who's got cancer, has had cancer, knows somebody who is affected by cancer, come along to any of our centres. There is no appointment necessary. It is free. You can just walk in. It's interesting how people sometimes don't believe it's as simple as just walking in, and people want more permission to be able to just walk in. So the only thing I would like to say is just for everybody to know, everyone is welcome at Maggie's at any point and at any time. And please do, even if you don't know what you might need, come in and see our centres and just see if we're able to help and support you.
That's amazing. And before you go, so I've got into the habit of asking a guest to recommend a song.
Yeah.
So have you got a song that you would like to recommend our listeners to listen to?
Oh my gosh. So I went to see Pink last week in Cardiff. Absolutely love her. And I think the whole world should wear sparkly leotards and hang on to their bungee rope.
I'm here for that. I am here
Yeah,
for that.
let's have a sparkling leotard and bungee rope party. So I would highly recommend anything by Pink, but my very favorite artist is Bruce Springsteen. So I love Dancing in the Dark by Bruce Springsteen. And John Legend's version of that on the piano is well worth a listen to. But that's my very favourite chap.
Oh,
He's another one. Bruce Springsteen is another one, I think, who can have very difficult conversations and make them look easy. So the couple of times I've seen him, he talks about loss and how we manage without people and how we talk and express the sadness that comes with losing people. And I'm just overwhelmed that he does that with like 80,000 people and we're all in the palm of his hands. And so that's where my joy of him comes, that he's so very good at having or making, difficult situations talkable about.
yeah. And connecting through music as well, which is an interest that obviously everyone there has. So
Absolutely. Yeah. What's your favorite song?
My favorite song? Oh, you put me on the spot now. I haven't thought.
Your favorite song for today? Like, what else would we recommend to your listeners?
Oh gosh.
Did you see Tay-Tay last night?
No, I didn't go and see Taylor Swift last night. She played in Cardiff, didn't she?
Yeah.
No. But his support act, Paramore, they are one of my favorite bands.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll check them out. I don't know them. So thank you very much for that.
There we go. I'll recommend everyone to listen to Paramore.
Amazing.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And I just want to say a little thank you to Lara as well for organising this. I really appreciate her support, and yeah, thank you so much. I know you're really busy, so I really appreciate you taking your time to chat with me today. It's been really, really insightful, and I'm just really grateful to have this conversation with you.
Me too, Aimee. Thanks so much. An absolute pleasure to be involved. Lovely to meet you.